Major breaking news out of the United States Supreme Court. A huge bit of news. The United States Supreme Court has decided to hear on cert. They have granted cert to the Mexico versus the American gun industry case involving whether or not the Protection and Lawful Commerce and Arms Act covers and protects the gun industry from this attack by the government of Mexico. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about it when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of Israel Disarmed, What the 10/7 Attacks on Israel Teach Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. Check it out on Amazon. All right, major breaking news. The United States Supreme Court has decided that they will indeed hear on the merits the case of the government of Mexico against several gun companies, including Smith & Wesson. This is a lawsuit that was brought by the government of Mexico in Boston, Massachusetts, strategically designed to go to the worst court of appeals jurisdiction, if you will, the worst anti-gun jurisdiction in America, where there's no combination of judges that will give you any sort of favorable, honest ruling involving the application of the Second Amendment or involving firearms. And I'm happy to report that although the lower courts screwed up this case and refused to dismiss the government of Mexico's lawsuit against the American gun industry, the U.S. Supreme Court has just now found and decided that they will grant cert and will hear this case this term. This is likely a major blow to the anti-gun forces, whose one major part of what they're trying to do in the United States is to try to get around the federal immunity statute called the Protection and Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, or PILCA. Now, if you may recall, in the late 1990s, there was an attempt by a whole host of anti-gun cities, like New Orleans and Chicago and the like, as I recall, to try to go after the gun industry to hold them liable for the criminal acts of third-party gangbangers over whom the gun industry had literally no control, never interacted with. But the fact that there was this attempt to sue the gun industry, claiming that they were somehow responsible for these bad actors doing bad things with their products, again, over whom they had no control, the purpose, in my view, was not to win these cases, but to bog the gun industry down in massive multi-million-dollar discovery efforts and years of litigation, distracting workers and employees and executives in the gun industry from doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is to make better products faster, more efficient, and better for the consumer, and so on. Now, in 2005, Congress, with the urging of George W. Bush, the president at the time, at the gun industry, and the Pentagon, by the way, said that we need to do something to protect America's gun industry, because in addition to making sure we have a right to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment, which must have a supply of firearms and ammunition, which means you have to have companies that supply firearms and ammunition to the American consumer so they can exercise their right to keep and bear arms. And at the same time, it is obviously the case that the American military, as well as American law enforcement, wants to be able to acquire firearms from American sources, from domestic sources, because alternatively, you don't want to be getting your firearms for your military or your defense industry or your law enforcement industry or your consumers that exercise their Second Amendment rights. You don't want to be dependent upon foreign suppliers of firearms and ammunition like Russia, China, and the like. That's obviously absurd, as the Ukraine is now learning, where they were entirely dependent upon foreign suppliers for their arms. Now, with that said, what happened is, in the last several years, there's been a new effort to try to get around these laws, the Protection and Lawful Commerce Act, Arms Act, PILCA, on the grounds that there are certain exceptions to the rule. And again, the purpose of PILCA was to say that you cannot hold gun companies liable for the criminal conduct of third parties over whom they have no control, in the same way that you cannot sue a baseball bat company for somebody using their baseball bat years later after they made the baseball bat to hit somebody over the head and commit a crime. You can't sue the baseball bat company for making the baseball bat when it's been misused by someone for a crime. That's obviously the same as holding the internet liable, a VCR company liable, a Betamax company liable, a recording device company liable, so on and so on. If someone misuses that to, for example, do illegal copyright copying of copyrighted material, and so on and so on. So the bottom line is that the Supreme Court today says they want to hear this case because the lower courts in that terrible anti-gun jurisdiction of the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit out of Boston has been allowing this case to move forward on behalf of the government of Mexico against the gun industry. And now the Supreme Court says we want to hear this case. Now they likely heard this case, agreed to hear this case, maybe because there's a circuit split on this issue. It's a major federal case. There's a lot of interest in this. Obviously, they're not stupid. The justices understand exactly what's going on. There's an attempt to end run this. And the reason why the legal hook that the anti-gunners are trying to use is under that PILCA statute, that immunity statute, there's certain exceptions that basically are designed to say, look, if a gun company, lies about a product, does something along those lines, well then, yeah, they can still be sued. So what's going on is the anti-gunners are trying to expand the exceptions in the PILCA statute so broadly that the exception swallows the rule, and any immunity protections that a gun company would have or benefit from PILCA would lose that because the exceptions would be so broadly interpreted. In the context of this particular case, the government of Mexico is literally arguing that the gun industry is somehow intentionally trying to oversupply the various markets in the United States, so they will ultimately be trafficked down into Mexico, and then once they're in Mexico, bad people will do bad things with the guns that these American gun companies manufactured. Now, needless to say, as a matter of fact, I think these allegations are a stretch and basically not possible to be proven in court. I don't see how any way you could win this case on the merits, in my opinion, on behalf of the plaintiffs. Nevertheless, remember, in my view, the purpose of these lawsuits is not to win the case at the end of the day. What this is really about is forcing the gun industry to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars not on making their products better or on improving the supply of firearms to Americans. Instead, they have to spend that money on attorneys and on legal costs and the headaches, and it also takes their employees and their executives' eye off the ball, because instead of spending time on improving their product and growing their business, which is what businessmen are supposed to be doing, instead they're going to spend time in depositions and wasting time with lawyers talking about the legal cases. And that is exactly why Congress enacted this PILCA statute, to prevent this kind of lawfare against the American gun industry. And now the U.S. Supreme Court is going to hear this case. And just to be specific, this is what the question presented is, submitted by the gun industry, specifically by Smith & Wesson and their excellent lawyer, Noe Francisco, who is the former Solicitor General of the United States, so a very influential American lawyer before the Supreme Court. So it's very good that he is handling this case. And here's what he wrote to the Supreme Court, which has now been granted cert. The Mexican government has sued leading members of the American firearms industry, seeking to hold them liable for harms inflicted by Mexican drug cartels. According to Mexico, America's firearms companies have engaged in a series of business practices for decades, from selling semi-automatic rifles to making magazines that hold over 10 rounds to failing to impose various sales restrictions that have, in effect, created a supply of firearms later smuggled across the border and ultimately used by the cartels to commit crimes. Mexico asked for billions of dollars in damages plus extensive injunctive relief, imposing new gun control measures in the United States. And of course, we know what happened is that while the district court dismissed the case, the Court of Appeals, because the Court of Appeals for the First Circuit is the worst court in America for the Second Amendment, the worst court in America for guns. The First Circuit Court of Appeals out of Boston. You know that. And guess what? They said the Mexican government case can go forward despite the fact it's absurd. And do you think there's any debate that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's anti-gunners in the White House are working in some way or encouraging the Mexican government to go after the American gun industry? In my view, I can't see there being any other way that the Mexican government knew exactly how to sue and where to sue and what theories to use in the right court without some support from someone here in the United States. That's my guess. I'm guessing I'm probably right, but I guess only time will tell. Now, here are the questions presented that the Supreme Court just granted cert to. The questions presented are, number one, whether the production and sale of firearms in the United States is the proximate cause of the alleged injuries to the Mexican government stemming from violence committed by drug cartels in Mexico. And the last question presented is this. Number two, whether the production and sale of firearms in the United States amounts to aiding and abetting illegal firearms trafficking because firearms companies allegedly know that some of their products are unlawfully trafficked. So there you have it, folks. Breaking news, very exciting news. We will keep you apprised as to the briefing schedule. We'll know that very soon. In the meantime, make sure you follow me on X at 4 Boxes Diner, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video, and we'll see you again very soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.